Hello, I'm Karen Netto, Region Director of the Greater Pacific Region of the Embroiderers Guild of America. This workshop is being made available to all GPR members using funds from the Gay Phillips Education Grant. Ms. Phillips left her estate to EGA. The EGA Board of Directors has allocated funds from the estate to each region to use for an educational project for all of the region members. I would like to thank the project committee who have participated in the creation of this workshop. Robin Berry and Lisbeth Mathieu. Their efforts are greatly appreciated. Thank you, ladies. I would also like to introduce and acknowledge Joel Schoenbrunn. Joel is our videographer and editor for this project. Joel has an MFA from UCLA and has been working for various parts of the visual media industry for nearly 20 years. He is graciously donating his time and energies to this project. Without him, this wouldn't be happening. Thank you, Joel. Lois is an award-winning teacher. Ms. Kirshner has been specializing in designing in landscapes and interpreting them on canvas embroideries. Lois holds teacher certification from NAN and serves as their teacher certification director. In 2014, she received NAN's prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award and the City of Cupertino Fine Art Commission Distinguished Artist Award in recognition of her artistic contribution to the community. Lois, you are one of our true treasure gems. Thank you for all you've done for this, and let's get stitching.
Thank you, Karen. And a special thanks to the Greater Pacific Region for inviting me to be filmed teaching this piece. I hope you're going to enjoy stitching Spring Garden. The design is based on a garden that I visited where hedges separated a lot of different flower beds. Some were formal and some were informal. The piece includes a variety of design and stitching techniques to convey a sense of realism and stitches to create contrast and perspective. Let's take a look. The actual design line in this piece pulls your eye into it, but stitching choices also play a role. The thread color and value in the foreground are dark and become lighter as you move into the background. Stitches are larger in the foreground and become smaller as you move into the background. Texture, those threads with volume and dimension, are going to come forward in the piece, such as with this bush and tall flowers. And then the reflective quality of materials also captured the eye. In this piece, the sheen of the silk, the sparkle of the beads, the reflective quality of the nylon in the clouds are going to draw your eye. You can use these techniques in your stitching to make it more interesting. This video is meant to be used with an instruction booklet. Let me show you some of the parts. At the beginning is a table of contents. It lists the sequence of all of the instructions for your stitching, as well as an index for all of the stitches. On the second page of the table of contents at the bottom is my contact information, and I hope you'll contact me with questions as you do your stitching, and if you have any. After all of the instructions at the back are a series of appendices. First, there are colored pictures of the 3 stitched models, one for 18 count, one for linen, one for Congress cloth. You can use them as a reference when you do your own stitching. Next are design templates. You're going to use these for tracing the design onto your fabric. And finally is a thread list. Again, you'll use this when you select your threads. Spring Garden can be stitched on several different ground fabrics: 18 count canvas, Congress cloth, or 25 count linen. The stitches and threads I selected work on these counts. Choose cream colored fabric. For that color is going to look natural, especially where it shows through some of the stitches, which is intended. I use a 12-inch by 12-inch piece. The wide margin is a good place to practice some of your stitches and act as a doodle cloth. You want to finish the raw edges on linen so that the threads don't unravel, and on your canvas with some type of tape or other finishing so the threads don't get caught in the cut edges. Tapestry needles will be used for your stitching. Depending on the count of your fabric, you'll use a different size for straight stitches and diagonal stitches. A number 28 tapestry needle is used for the larger seed beads. A beading needle is used for the smaller seed beads, and you'll use that with Congress cloth and linen. In addition, you'll want a milliner's or a harness needle for the bullion knot. The difference between those two is that the milliner's needle is sharp and the harness needle has a rounded end to it, so you won't scratch yourself. You'll want to use a laying tool when stitching this piece, so strands don't cross over each other, especially with the longer stitches. So you want to pick one that is a comfortable size and weight for you. Here's some examples. This one is a beautifully carved wooden laying tool. This one is plastic. It has flat sides, and its advantage is it's not going to roll away from you. The stiletto has the advantage of being small and lightweight in your hand. The trolley needle is used by placing it on your index finger so you can lay threads over it. Its advantage is that you're not holding anything in your hand. You'll also find that a needle threader with a wire loop is particularly good when threading your milliner's or harness needle for the bullion knots. And then you'll also be using stretcher bars. I recommend ones that are a 1/2 inch in size because they give more stability to your work. Now with linen, I did try to use a roller frame and even an embroidery hoop, but I found that they just didn't give me the tension that I wanted because I want my fabric to be drum tight, and the piece is definitely designed not to be stitched in hand. So now I want to show you my basic set of stitching tools. In addition to my laying tool, I have a good sharp scissors, a pair of tweezers, which I use to take stitches out because that happens, and then also magnifiers. Now my magnifiers I clip on my glasses, but let's take a look at our students and see what tools and gadgets they use. So let's look at our stitching areas. We want to look at how our work is anchored and our lighting and magnification. So let's look first at Robin and see how she's anchored her work.
So first of all, I tend to use a frame weight. So I will introduce you to Claude and Claudette from the 2010 EGA National Seminar. It has a fairly hefty weight, and you just put it onto your frame wherever you need it, and then you have the space to stitch. I tend to use magnets to hold my various things onto my frame. I have 2 different types of needle threaders. As Lois suggested, I have very sharp scissors. I have tweezers. I tend to use a very small kit, so I have small tweezers. I have 2 different laying tools. One is bone, which has a thicker point, which I tend to use with more things like ribbon. And I have another laying tool with a very fine point for very fine threads. I also have, which I understand we'll be covering later, a thread straightener. I have a bead holder, and this is a needle puller. And for those of you who don't recognize it, it's under your carpets, and it's available for very inexpensive. I also brought some additional threads, mostly because I like glitz, and so I would add those in as I'm stitching. For magnification, I have prescription glasses, which have been made especially for me for stitching.
So I use these clamps that I bought at Orchard Supply, and I keep them in my stitching room so that my husband doesn't decide they're good in the garage. And they're very simple. They move up and down. I think this is a 4-inch clamp, and you just put it on the table and then you squeeze it. It holds it as firm as you can possibly get on a table. It's really good when you've got a frame, because you can then move your frame closer and farther from you. The other thing I can't live without is my magnifier and lamp. And this is very versatile because I'm running on a battery pack instead of on electricity, which is good for travel. It has a clamp that will clamp onto the table, but it's got this monstrous magnifier and it's got light in there. So I've got everything I need, and it's very easily adjustable. And it sits behind my chair at home all the time.
At the back of your instruction booklet, you're going to find some design templates. In Appendix B, you find a larger template which is used for the 18-count mono canvas, and B2 is a smaller template used for Congress cloth and linen. The templates are sized to be used with a pre-cut mat, so you can stitch to the outer perimeter design line and you don't need to go beyond it. I want to put my design template on a light source of some type. You can use a light box, a piece of white paper. You could even do this against a window where you have a light source. And then on top of that light source, I'm going to put my template. And I'm going to tape it down so that it stays in place while I do my drawing. I'm just using some masking tape to hold it in place. I'm going to leave one edge untaped. And then I put my fabric on top, my canvas or linen, whichever you're using, and I want to line up the weave of the fabric with the outside perimeter lines. Now, if your fabric isn't straight, and often Congress cloth isn't, it comes off the roll being very curvy, you might be able to line up just a horizontal line or a vertical line on the weave. So do the best you can to see those perimeter lines. And now again, I'm going to tape my fabric in place so it doesn't move. I'm leaving one corner untaped for the moment. You'll see why in a minute. So I take my ruler and place it on these outside perimeter lines. I'm using a hard pencil with my canvas. I could use that with Congress cloth. With linen, I would use a softer pencil. I could also use a fine line permanent ink pen, but I wouldn't use black because black is just going to show through your stitches. So I would do all 4 perimeter lines and also the lines of the hedge with my ruler. And again, I want to line that up right on the weave of the fabric, skipping the tree trunk over to the perimeter line. Now the rest of the lines can really be hand drawn. With regard to linen, which is a very flexible fabric, you may need to tape down all the way along the edges of the canvas. And with Congress cloth, which tends to be quite skewed, you want to put your perimeter line on the weave of the fabric. Don't worry if it's not exactly on top of the template line. Follow the weave of the fabric. Okay. Now, if you can't see the lines that you're drawing, here's where I can lift up one corner of my fabric to be able to perhaps locate them a little bit more easily as I'm doing my hand drawing. Now, don't fret if your lines aren't exactly on the template lines. That's because your stitching is going to meet your design lines. Our next step is to mount our fabric onto the stretcher bars. So I want to show you first how to do canvas and Congress cloth, and then linen is done a little differently, so I'll show that to you next. So I have my 18 count mono canvas. My design has been transferred, my edges are taped, and I'm going to start tacking onto the stretcher bar by putting my first tack in the center of one of the sides. And then I'm going to pull my canvas as taut as I can for putting in the second tack. Next, I'll do a third side, again pulling as taut as I can. And then the fourth side. Again, I'm putting these tacks into the center of the fabric. Now I'm going to repeat that sequence, putting my next tack about a 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch, but no more, away from the first tack, and then down to the second tack, each time pulling tautly to get the best tension that I can. Now sometimes the wood of the stretcher bars is a little hard to push with your thumb, so you can use one of these little gadgets that gives you better leverage. And my next tack, and I just work all the way around my stretcher bars. My very last tack is going to be in the corners. So that's how I would do canvas, Congress cloth, but now I want to show you how to do linen. In this case, I suggest, because the linen weave is very light and your fabric moves very easily, that you tack an entire side with the grain being straight against the edge of your stretcher bar. And then do another side, again pulling to make your fabric taut. My tacks are about every 1/2 inch apart, and I work down that side of the linen. And after having done that side, then I continue to do the third and the fourth side of the linen. The objective for the canvas and the linen is to make your fabric as drum tight as possible.